Have you ever wondered how far a nation would go to defend its sovereignty, even against the warnings of its closest allies? As we stand on the brink of a new dawn, we find ourselves engrossed in a narrative of determination and defiance, a story of a nation's resolve to protect its people at all costs. We are talking about the Gaza war, a conflict that has been etched into the annals of history, not just for its sheer brutality, but also for its potential to redefine alliances. One of the central figures in this saga is the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr Netanyahu, a man known for his unyielding stance against any threat to his nation. Despite repeated warnings from the US President Joe Biden, Netanyahu has vowed to defeat Hamas in Rafah. His determination is reminiscent of the War of Independence 76 years ago, when the newly formed State of Israel, outnumbered and outgunned, triumphed against a coalition of Arab states. But this time around the stakes are even higher. The US, one of Israel's staunchest allies, has suspended the delivery of bombs to Israel, fearing civilian casualties in Rafah. Yet, Netanyahu remains undeterred, promising to fight on, even if it means standing alone. Let's delve into the intricate history of this conflict and how it has shaped the US-Israel relationship. To fully grasp the depth of this situation, we need to journey back in time. Our story begins in October 2024, when the conflict first ignited. The world watched in alarm as tensions escalated, and it wasn't long before the situation took a dire turn. As casualties mounted, the international community began to intervene, urging for a ceasefire. But the pleas fell on deaf ears, and the violence continued unabated. Fast forward to March 2024, and we find the United Nations stepping in, passing a ceasefire resolution. However, Israel, under Prime Minister Netanyahu, faced the resolution with defiance, choosing to continue its campaign in Gaza and intensifying the Rafah offensive. It was at this pivotal moment that relations between the US and Israel began to strain. The US, traditionally a staunch ally of Israel, abstained from the UN ceasefire vote, marking a significant shift in its stance. Netanyahu, undeterred by the international pressure, cancelled high-priority meetings with the White House, further exacerbating the tension. Former US President Donald Trump weighed in, criticizing Israel's decision to release images of the devastating war. His remarks, however, did little to sway Netanyahu's resolve. Instead, the Israeli Prime Minister pledged to proceed with the offensive even without the support of the US. As the conflict entered May 2024, Israel signaled its intention to press ahead with military operations in Rafah, despite repeated warnings from the US of a potential disaster. The US, in turn, suspended the delivery of bombs to Israel, fearing an increase in civilian casualties. With this timeline in mind, we can begin to unravel the complexities of the situation. When does a nation's right to defend itself cross a red line? President Joe Biden seems to have an answer. It was no secret that the US government had been issuing warnings against the Israeli operation in Rafah. The Biden administration had been quite vocal about the concerns, citing the potential for significant civilian casualties and the destabilizing implications this could have for the region. Biden, no stranger to the intricacies of foreign policy, was clear in his stance. This operation, in his eyes, would cross a red line. But what does this red line signify? In diplomatic terms, It's a boundary, a limit that, when crossed, demands a response. The president's use of this term was an unambiguous signal to Israel and the world that the US considered the planned operation a step too far. This hardline stance was not without its consequences. It threatened to strain the long-standing alliance between Israel and the United States, an alliance that has been a cornerstone of Middle Eastern geopolitics for decades. The US-Israel relationship, built on shared democratic values and strategic interests, found itself on shaky ground. One of the more tangible repercussions of this disagreement was seen in the suspension of a major arms delivery to Israel. The US government held back the delivery of 1,800 2,000 LB bombs and 1,700 500 Udo bombs, a decision clearly motivated by fears of the potential human cost of the Rafah operation. But the diplomatic chess game was far from over. The Israeli government, under the steadfast leadership of Prime Minister Netanyahu, had their own cards to play. Despite these stern warnings, the Israeli Prime Minister had a different perspective. In the face of international pressure, Netanyahu held his ground, invoking historical precedents. This determined leader, known for his steadfastness, was unfazed by the warnings coming from the United States. He dismissed their concerns, stating that, if need be, Israel would fight on against all odds. Netanyahu's defiance was not just words. He was ready to put action behind his vows. He declared, "If we need to, we will stand alone. I have said that if necessary, we will fight with our fingernails." These words echoed the resolve of a man prepared to do whatever it took to defend his nation. But the Prime Minister didn't stop there. He reached back into history, invoking the War of Independence, a defining moment for the state of Israel. In the War of Independence, 76 years ago, we were the few against the many, he said. We did not have weapons. There was an arms embargo on Israel, but with great strength of spirit, heroism, and unity among us, we were victorious. This reference to a time when Israel stood alone and triumphed was a clear message. Netanyahu was drawing a parallel, signaling that Israel could and would overcome the odds once again, regardless of international pressure or constraints. His unwavering stance was a testament to his belief in the strength and resilience of his nation. It was a message to his people that they could rely on their leader to fight for them, even if it meant standing alone on the world stage. However, this defiant stand did not come without consequences. Every action has a reaction, and in this case, it was a substantial one. As the conflict in Rafah escalated, concern grew over the potential for increased civilian casualties. This concern wasn't just shared by onlookers, but by key players in the international community. The United States, a long-standing ally of Israel, took a step that sent ripples through the political landscape. In an unprecedented move, the US suspended the delivery of nearly 2,000 2,000-pound bombs and 1,700 500-pound bombs to Israel. This was not a decision taken lightly. The fear was that these weapons could cause civilian deaths in Rafah, a fear grounded in the harsh realities of the escalating conflict. This decision by the US, though undoubtedly controversial, was a clear message to Israel and the wider world. The potential for civilian casualties in Rafah could not be ignored, and the US was willing to take tangible steps to prevent it, even if it meant straining their relationship with a key ally. The impact of this move on the Gaza war was significant. It signaled a shift in the way the international community, and particularly the US, was responding to the conflict. No longer were they mere observers, they were now active participants in shaping the course of the conflict. This decision also had wider implications for the US-Israel relationship. It marked a divergence from their usual stance, a deviation that could potentially alter the dynamics of their alliance. While the immediate impact of this decision on the Gaza war was clear, the long-term effects on the US-Israel relationship remained uncertain. Yet, amid the uncertainty, one thing was clear. This decision was a tipping point. It marked a shift in the narrative of the conflict, a change in the stance of the international community, and potentially a turning point in the US-Israel relationship. This decision marks a significant turning point in the conflict and in US-Israel relations. As we reflect on these events, several critical questions arise. We've delved into the complex timeline of the Gaza war, witnessed the crossing of the red line, and observed Netanyahu's defiant stand. We've reached the tipping point where the US suspended the delivery of significant weaponry due to concerns for civilian lives in Rafah. So, what does the future hold? Will Netanyahu continue to dismiss international warnings, invoking the spirit of the War of Independence? Will the US-Israel relationship weather this storm? Or will this conflict be a turning point in their long-standing bond? And the most pressing question of all, what will be the fate of the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of this war? These are questions that time will answer, but one thing is clear: the stakes are high and the world is watching closely. As the world watches, the future of the Gaza war and the US-Israel relationship hangs in the balance.